Are you feeling blessed or cursed in our present times? Either way, you are one of the most important beings ever to be alive. As you might already wonder why, let us examine what we consider necessary building blocks for bridging our hope to the future, for each individual, but also for humanity at large. Let us be grounded in science, while it takes us on an entertaining journey through what is needed for our planet to awaken to the next level of human consciousness. One in which we are simply humanity one. After all, we have crawled through the mud of biological evolution for billions of years, not to sacrifice the future of our children on the altar of greed, fear, and selfishness, but rather to learn from our mistakes and trauma, and to transform this wisdom into freedom. We are here to lay the ground for our children to take the next evolutionary step, one giant leap for humanity, the sum total of all our baby steps on our quest for a brighter future. There is a puzzling paradox perplexing our planet. By accelerating and colliding particles at the speed of light, human beings are able to identify the tiny little particle that constitutes mass. At the same time, we are seemingly unable to respond collectively to the climate crisis or a global pandemic. In the depth, most religions have the same perennial philosophy at core, while at the surface, we are unable to accept each other's interpretations of reality. Our paradoxical nature warrants both wonder and worry about whether time is running out for our hope of making a cultural quantum leap towards salvation. In this movie, we contemplate components crucial to cross-fertilize our social, spiritual, and scientific skills, which might make it possible to allow our extreme capacity for co-creation, evidenced, for example, by the collective consciousness behind the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, to inform and impregnate other parts of society. Within the social domain, teachers, coaches, leaders, therapists, healers, and parents may all foster such individual and cultural evolution. Our collective search for truth has seemingly progressed further within physics, mathematics, biology, and chemistry than in the interpersonal domains. As a species, our ability to respond collectively to common challenges appears crippled by the apathy caused by a lack of consensus, overwhelming complexity, and information overload. Still, the energy from the destructive friction around us may nourish the flame inside of us that kindles hope. As Albert Einstein stated, energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another. Perhaps the part of humanity that is constantly curious, which grows stronger when recognizing another source of the same essence, may start to spark a creative solution arising from the ashes of destruction. This movie aims to further ignite such evolution workers and provide you with a scientific toolkit. The relational technologies unveiled by research on psychotherapy and leadership. No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he is not the same man. These famous words by Heraclitus, the old Greek philosopher, reflect the perpetual change that is the only permanent factor in our universe. Hence, life is dependent on constant evolution, an open-ended race to adapt to our ever-emergent environment. For most animals, physical conditions constitutes the core of their selective environments. For human beings, our culture, our collectively stored knowledge and wisdom has sparked a superior evolutionary advantage and is a major part of our selective environment. Oscar Ichazu, a brilliant wisdom keeper from Bolivia, who founded the Holy Arica School, simply wrote, "It is our social relationship that has developed our entire psyche, to the point where we can say that the basic environment of human beings is not nature, but society." What is it then, this consciousness of change that has taken us from our animalistic nature as cavemen into the technological beings taking part in a development going so fast that we are about to lose track of where we're headed? What comprises the story of who we are, what we think is right or wrong, and what is it that makes the choices constituting our individual and collective destiny? Thomas Huxley, also known as Darwin's bulldog, for his fierce advocacy of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, claimed in 1880 that the struggle for existence holds as much in the intellectual as in the physical world. A theory is a species of thinking, and its right to exist is coextensive with its power to resist extinction by its rivals. Contemporary thinkers, such as the British evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, have further entertained the possibility that ideas are subject to the same evolutionary pressures as biological attributes. Dawkins initially defined the unit of cultural transmission as a meme. Melodies, fashions, mathematical formulas, and learned skills count as a few examples. Memes are woven into the very fabric of human experience. Some, such as the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, would perhaps argue that this idea matrix is the human experience itself. Religious wars serve as evidence of how real this matrix may feel, as would a core role that sexuality, sports, professions, music, idols, movies, and literature have for our identity. The narratives we tell ourselves about ourselves. Despite memes proving difficult to precisely define, there is no questioning that human beings willingly sacrifice their own happiness, their valued time with their children, and even their lives to contribute to our intellectual gene pool, our collective culture. One of the oldest technological advances seeking to secure the survival of our species is medicine. Our history is full of examples of sacrificing lives for a greater cause, both to produce and prevent revolutionary ideas regarding our physical and psychological anatomy. Still, a core misconception of medical healing practices is that technological advances, specific techniques, procedures, and/or specific treatment ingredients are what make them effective. Interestingly, human contact, empathy, and cultural expectancy seem to be at least equally important. This is where medical science, the study of our physical manifestation, floats further into the abstract reality of our psychological nature. Here, evidence proves difficult to gather, as the material in this domain is in constant change, depending on one's perspective. Bruce Vampold, one of the leading psychotherapy researchers today, sheds light on the prevailing secrecy seeking to protect the patient, thus making it disturbingly difficult to investigate.
Psychotherapy is a very unusual profession. Okay, what other profession is so isolated and secretive, right? We go into a room with a patient. What's done there is confidential. Nobody really knows. Okay, we don't get any feedback really about outcomes or our technique. Surgeons, they know whether they have goofed because the blood vessel ruptures or something.
The Quality Lab of Psychotherapy in Oslo has provided the privilege to examine actual therapeutic processes. Reflections from this unique prism is one of the primary perspectives of this movie. The competing nature of humans has split psychotherapy research into two camps: those who advocate administering specific potions according to a recipe, and those who champion common factors, such as emotional intelligence, interpersonal skills, and awareness of the therapeutic alliance. Our research and that of others have tried to bridge these two camps and propose a marriage between common and specific psychotherapy factors. Motivated by finding cooperative factors rather than losing direction by defending our place in a hierarchy. One marvel of curiosity is what we call a placebo. The placebo effect, highly recognized in medicine, as it accounts for 40% of clinical change, is a mesmerizing ingredient in the mystery of healing practices. One of the most enchanting examples of the placebo effect may help us appreciate the power of this phenomenon. Ellen Langer, the first woman ever to be tenured as a professor of psychology at Harvard, confirmed Einstein's tenet that time is relative in her counterclockwise experiment. A group of people over the age of 70 was taken to an isolated area where a scene from 1959 was exactly replicated. The furniture was dated to that year, they were shown films from 1959, and even the newspapers and magazines they were given came from that period. Within 1 week of this experiment, the group's actual symptoms of aging reversed. The joints in their fingers were more flexible, and their eyesight improved. Langer concluded that because the participants were given the same mental information as in 1959, their bodies began to adapt to the physical situation at that time. They had been pulled out of mothballs and made to feel important again, and Langer suggested that a rekindling of their egos was central to the reclamation of their bodies, which resembled their own energetic blueprint from 1959. This paints a picture of the more abstract, or perhaps mystical realms of how human welfare is a complex canvas to comprehend. Social healing evolved long before our human race, as it is even found among social insects such as ants and bees. Humans have healed through social practices, despite many such practices not being considered beneficial across current cultures. This is well documented by historical sources, cross-cultural studies, animal studies, and modern studies on so-called placebo effects. Placebo effects are a major part of healing practices, involving an interpersonal relationship between a socially sanctioned healer and a person in distress. Across times and cultures, the rituals involved in these healing practices often produce no or negative specific effects. Paradoxically, they still produce good outcomes. In Western medicine, the patient takes the medicine for good scientific reasons. In many traditions, for instance in the Shipibo tradition in the Peruvian Amazon forest, the shaman is the only one required to take medicine for the patient to heal. This may not be considered scientific for the Western tribe, but it would involve serious ethical concerns to inform patients if we believe the healing ritual has no effect, simply because that tends to ruin the effect. Providing the patient with a healing myth is crucial for social healing and is considered a core common factor in psychotherapy. To the degree that the patient accepts the narrative and the healing ritual is instigated by the healer, positive outcomes are expected. Perhaps because we allow ourselves to hope for change and therefore open to influence. Or perhaps it is simply because the intention to heal from within is met by the intention to heal us from the outside. Every patient has the seeds of his or her own cure. This natural capacity to heal is often repressed, and the psyche views direct confrontations as attacks. Yet, when a patient seeks healing through a sanctioned healer, he or she can recruit the wise mind's ability to overcome difficulties, with society's blessing to heal. The unconscious mind can overrule the ego's resistance and engage in a self-healing process through an unconscious agreement with a culturally accepted change narrative provided. Habib Davanloo, a prominent Iranian psychotherapy researcher, proposed that this phenomenon may be most clearly captured in the concept of an unconscious alliance between a confronting therapist and the wise mind. Spiritual work typically leans more towards allowing whatever unfolds, while psychotherapy, aiming for an unconscious alliance, confronts maladaptive patterns directly. Such paths are all on target if the applied map is congruent with the territory of the person's experience. When the healing narratives are not only congruent with our experience, but also reflect ancient wisdom, cross-cultural phenomena, common sense, or science, our soul resonates with them. Plato would say that we remember them. Such co-creation of cultural knowledge allows the student, child, or client to recognize, discover, and pinpoint their own experience on the map, and increase their awareness and understanding of their psychological terrain. This ignites our shared flame to see the terrain more clearly. Let us journey through lessons learned from psychotherapy that may help us better understand the incomprehensible and how to apply this map to our current situation, a terrain typically offering multiple paths of truth and tantalizing distractions. In a world that desperately needs change, what can we all, parents, teachers, coaches, trainers, therapists, and leaders, learn from the field of psychotherapy research? What do Peruvian shamans, executive coaches, and clinical doctors have in common? And what does change entail at its biological or perhaps spiritual core? The writing is on the wall. Unless we face reality and make a quantum leap as a collective, our species risk facing extinction, as do many other species evolved by the miracle of life on this most precious planet. At this point, we need some fundamental building blocks from psychotherapy, philosophy, and organizational psychology to later understand our hypothesis that psychotherapy, as a medical, social, and philosophical discipline, when applied as a tool to evolve individuals and groups, is a necessary instrument to adapt to the radical change upon us. Within the realm of Western psychotherapy, healing myths are typically systemized within distinct treatment methods. To paraphrase Peter Fonagy, a central figure in current psychotherapy research, the Knights Templars of psychotherapy could righteously believe that the people they cured recovered because of their magic spells and carefully measured potions, which often take decades to learn how to brew. Contemplating the recipe, map, or manual of whatever one's favorite psychotherapy happens to be. This looks logical, and the Cambrian explosion of evidence-based treatments seems a natural evolution, assuming that specific treatments are particularly potent when presented to particular psychological disorders. Such evidence-based treatments, typically captured in 3-letter acronyms, are specialist interventions requiring extensive training and continuous supervision. Ideally, to qualify as such an evidence-based treatment, the potion should be compared with another potion, one the patient and therapist both believe is beneficial. This recipe should show a superior effect for a specific diagnosis in a randomized clinical trial. Similar results should be replicated at several locations to prove that it was the potion, not other factors, that produced the outcome. Such scientific principles may slowly crystallize our abilities into the sophisticated arts needed to evolve our civilization. However, as Fonagy wrote in 2010, it should be clear to you that as long as the acronym for the magic formula has 3 letters in it, it will be shown to be superior, mostly against treatment as usual or a less than adequate comparison. Around half of patients following psychotherapy return to normal functioning. However, we face a significant challenge when trying to understand how healing occurs in various talking cures. According to the medical model, we would ideally like to provide specific, evidence-based treatments for specific problems and demonstrate that such specific methods can systematically produce beneficial outcomes. In such an ideal parallel universe, the therapist is an expert in effectively selecting and delivering the appropriate strategy. However, less than 1% of the variance in outcomes is accounted for by the treatment method. Indeed, it seems somewhat strange to examine the effect of different treatments, which accounts for next to nothing of the variance in outcome, when a factor such as a researcher's allegiance accounts for nearly 70%. In fact, the legendary psychotherapy researcher Lester Luborsky found that the outcome of published papers was a function of the theoretical orientation of its first author. Historically, and somewhat broadly speaking, one of the major consequences of finding no significant differences between treatments was a strong incentive to search for the effective ingredients common in all treatments. This resulted in a common factor approach, which conceptualizes psychotherapy as an interpersonal interaction, in which aspects associated with attachment theory and socially constructed anticipations are the primary motors for healing. According to Vampold, the common factor model focuses on 5 elements that are both necessary and sufficient for change. 1. An entrusting curative setting in which treatment takes place. 2. The therapist provides a rationale for the therapy, which is accepted by the patient. 3. A culturally embedded explanation for the psychological disorder or psychic distress. 4. An emotional bond between the therapist and patient. And 5. A therapeutic ritual or procedure that promotes positive and progressive behavior. Different conceptualizations and studies have proposed between 1 and 89 distinctly different common factors. This is a puzzling range, but the working alliance or the therapeutic relationship is always counted among them and considered at the core of change in psychotherapy. In the case of this movie, the entrusting curative setting in which treatment takes place will be in the comfort of your inner reality while you digest the different steps of our journey. Our therapeutic rationale is that if you recognize the mind tools we map out as essential for collective survival, you will be willing and able to implement them in your life. We hope our menu will stimulate your appetite for similar nourishment, and that you will embrace the complex paradoxes of our psyche instead of seeking simple solutions. The explanations of our shared psychic distress, such as collective apathy, global mistrust, and emotional turmoil, are defended by currently renowned voices who echo similar knowledge across times and cultures to be as inclusive and trustworthy as possible. Our therapeutic alliance will primarily be rooted in the degree to which you accept us as channels for cultural transmission, and our emotional bond based on our shared destiny as a species. The therapeutic ritual is that each one of us considers if and how to best integrate the impact of our shared journey, both in our social roles and personal inquiry. Talking to ourselves, friends, and family. One defensive narrative is that if it was not for the pain and trauma we feel victims of, most of us would have contributed to our common mission of bringing peace on earth. Still, our everyday lives, both inside and outside, mirror the reality that this is not as easy to act out as it is to imagine. Let us investigate why psychotherapy researchers claim that the relational friction of nonverbal language is a crucial ingredient to understand, to avoid falling victim to its powers. Within the local phenomenon of Western psychotherapy, the therapeutic relationship has been considered a cornerstone of change since Sigmund Freud, the father of Western psychotherapy. This was perhaps best captured in his concept of transference, which is at the core of the therapeutic relationship. The power of the unconscious to project qualities of past experiences onto current and future relationships. Particularly in significant relationships, the unconscious has a tendency to stage recurring, self-fulfilling prophecies, encapsulating our hypnotic histories, secrets, and life's delusions. To appreciate this dynamic, let us witness an illustrative interaction between a patient and their therapist, exemplifying how emotions, such as anger, imprint in our nervous system, where it can cloud and contort our perceptions of reality, leading us to project past experiences, such as those with our parents, onto current situations. Emotions color our minds and provoke our physical responses, leading our hormones and nervous system to recreate an inner environment so similar to past experiences that our being struggles to recognize the illusion. This can be felt so real that we mistakenly superimpose the past and our imagination onto the present moment, reliving such familiar patterns until we expose the emotional phantoms. If the therapist senses anger in the patient, they might ask,
"I sense some resistance in you. Are you hesitant about being here?"
An inquiry rooted in genuine curiosity can, when it is received through a defensive lens, be perceived as criticism. Given a resilient psychological immune system and a growth mindset, constructive criticism can vaccinate our immaterial selves with preventive insights. The patient who did not receive enough approval in the childhood might think,
I can't even do this right.
and activate the emotional response of shame. When the wound of disapproval is still unhealed, the mind instinctively seeks to shield us from the anguish of confronting such shame and makes the choices for us to rather increase our defenses, amplifying our anger. This may feed a false growing self-esteem, where our heightened minds changes the narrative slightly, leading the individual to think,
This douchebag is just like my father. Nothing I do is ever good enough.
Such a reaction might be a viable strategy when confronting an overbearing parent in real-life scenarios. However, in the confines of the therapy room, this approach can lead to one of two outcomes. Counter-transference, where both of them get unconsciously triggered.
If this escalates, I might feel threatened and would need to end this session.
And the therapist's own unresolved issues or emotional responses to the client's material activates an escalating defense. Or it might provide a fruitful window into the client's inner world, exposing which feelings to explore and a starting point for the educating journey on how to process these emotions. Transference and counter-transference can sometimes be so compelling that we get lost in a cinema dictated by the shadows of the past, failing to recognize the actual person before us. While our eyes and rational mind can identify the person we are interacting with, be it a spouse, child, or supervisor, our internal responses might replay patterns born from past traumas. For instance, our inner voice might cry out,
"Why won't you comfort me?"
echoing fears of abandonment, reminiscent of maternal neglect. And sometimes we might defensively snap,
"I won't let you push me around!"
even if the person's intent was benign, as their demeanor may unconsciously remind us of someone who once harmed us. Or it might yell,
"Why haven't you done as I've said?"
reflecting a desperate desire to offer the guidance we once craved, hoping they lead a life better than ours. Suppressing emotions might seem like an appealing strategy, but it often results in our body language betraying our spoken words.
"It's okay, sweetheart. These things happen."
You say it's okay, but I sense your anger.
Sometimes, subtle cues in our nonverbal communication might lead others to perceive a conflicting message, one divergent from our intended expression.
When she masks her anger with a smile, I feel uneasy. It disturbs my trust in the consistency of my surroundings and in my ability to interpret others' emotions. If you are angry, I prefer that you admit it. Explain why in a simple way, that it is not my fault, and validate anger as a healthy feeling to express in a constructive way.
Skilled therapists dance and duel with these phantoms in a manner that dissolves the illusory screen and unveil the theater's secret narrative. In order to master this terrain, they need to have mapped out their own inner reality. They will have to work on their unconscious triggers to make those parts of themselves conscious. It does not mean they have resolved every personal issue, but rather that they have developed such a profound self-awareness that they can instantly discern when these triggers become active. By knowing their own weak spots, their awareness will pick up on emotional impact from outside before it enters deep enough to get attached. This gap between stimulus and reaction is the available moment for reflection before we act. Accepting reality as is provides the best soil for what we later will refer to as self-authoring mind. This stage of consciousness allows us to prepare our responses rather than react impulsively. By becoming aware of, let us say, the aspect of shame in oneself, one can more reliably recognize the same scar in others. Consequently, they may be better armed to address the exact issue that is arising. For instance, the blocked emotion. Empathizing so profoundly that the patient feels seen builds a stronger alliance and allows for healing through the witness of the therapist. It is a delicate balance, one that requires the therapist to remain impartial and attuned solely to the patient's level of development, searching intuitively through their memory bank to find suitable interventions based on own knowledge, but tailored to the patient. Some therapists, by virtue of their heightened awareness, can stabilize the emotional frequency, thereby curating a safe haven for emotional introspection and eventual healing. Others, more mental in their approach, discern the cognitive pathways that have given rise to these emotions, clearing obstructions through a more analytical lens.
Guilt. Let's delve into the source of your guilt by openly acknowledging and honestly expressing the actions that lead to regret. You may find the courage to forgive yourself. This self-forgiveness, in turn, opens the door to valuable insights and growth, preventing the repetition of such actions.
Recognizing our emotions for what they are serves as stepping stones towards uncovering deeper truths. This elucidates the perplexities of the information transmitted between us. The myriad of layers, both seen and unseen, that shape our interpretations of others. Such complexities explain why we often feel misinterpreted or are perceived in ways we never intended, why we struggle in relationships, or why international conflicts or religious wars seem inevitable. It also provides us with a key on how to stop generational trauma and how to watch your thoughts. They become words. Watch your words. They become actions. Watch your actions. They become habits. Watch your habits. They become character. Watch your character, for it becomes your destiny. To speak the sagacity of Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism. The English poet William Blake wrote, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up, till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern." Much like Plato, he believed the human psyche's cinematic spectacles was confined by the theater's boundaries and its captivating shadows. Freud stated that transference is a universal phenomenon and that it determines the success of all healing rituals. As Hippocrates, the father of medicine, stated 2,500 years ago, it is more important to know what sort of person has a disease than to know what sort of disease a person has. This reminds us not to be blinded by our theoretical beliefs or impressions, but rather to be attuned to the actual person in the room and how they have arrived where they are now. In terms of adapting to our social reality, one of the most stunning findings was done by Salomon Asch, and the global research paradigm he ignited. In one of the first iterations of this paradigm, he recruited 87 male college students to participate in what he called a vision test. After showing his subjects a picture of a vertical line, followed by 3 lines of different length, one being the same length as the first, he then asked the subjects to identify which line was the same length as the first line. A near 100% rate of correct responses was expected. In the control group, the subjects completed the trials alone, and none made any errors. In the experimental group, the subjects completed 18 trials in a group of 8 people. 7 of these participants were actors, instructed to provide incorrect answers in 12 of the critical trials. In the first 2 trials, both the subject and the actors gave the obvious correct answer. In the third trial, all the actors gave the same wrong answer. These wrong responses recurred in 11 of the remaining 15 trials. It was subjects' behavior on these 12 critical trials that formed the aim of the study, to test how many participants would change their answers to conform to those of the 7 actors, despite their being wrong.
In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1. 1.
1. 2.
1. Once again, the correct answer is 2.
3. 3. 3.
3.
Performing the line experiment, they found that people were very often willing to ignore reality and give an incorrect answer to conform to the rest of the group. Overall, 75% of participants gave at least one incorrect answer in the critical trials, and 50% changed their perceptions such that the group norm became their view of reality. This was later confirmed by using brain scanners while doing similar experiments. The task was stupendously simple, and Ash summarized the findings this way: that intelligent, well-meaning young people are willing to call white black is a matter of concern. The degree of conformity changes across times and cultures. One study reported a range from 14% in Belgium to 58% in Indian culture. But thankfully, there are always some participants who systematically trust their own eyes above others. Combining the discovery of how easily we change our very perception of something as basic as the length of a straight line, with the knowledge of how the past shapes our perception of the present, we begin to grasp our difficulties differentiating shades of right and wrong. Approaching objective truths may be lost along mirrored subjective paths. Regardless of such challenges, our differences also make it interesting to get to know other people and cultures. They may also be the very fabric that attracts us to the people we fall in love with. Or what makes us curious about what personality our children develop, even if they challenge our preferred mannerisms. The ability to interpret others' worldviews, or be a translator of different dialects in this realm, is a skill that we may acquire from our parents, environment, life experience, or books and lectures. Let us investigate what aspects are needed to bridge the understanding between us, rather than being caught up in our differences. From psychotherapy, we know that the therapeutic alliance, the quintessential so-called common factor, is the most robust predictor of psychotherapeutic healing, explaining around 7.5% of the variance in outcomes. In sum, around 30,000 patients have contributed to research on this relationship between alliance and clinical change. Alliance is the professional term for what we in personal domains call how strong a relational bond is, and how it provides a channel of trust that makes the individual willingly withstand the pain of change, the humility of being exposed, and the honesty it takes to look beyond our protective illusions about ourselves, the world, and the people around us. Research informs us that the best therapists are able to create an adequate alliance with a range of patients, regardless of their personal characteristics. This ability includes the willingness and capacity to adequately challenge maladaptive patterns, avoid being overwhelmed by one's own emotions, and maintain a steadfast focus on tasks and goals, without being rigid. However, there is no identifiable source or doctrine that owns the concept or can speak with authority concerning the alliance. It is a common factor because it exists by consensus, a Platonic form. Further, the role of alliance is as important for the therapist as for the parent, coach, and teacher. This relational facet facilitates the holding space between the therapist and the patient. This is where the interventions are played out in accordance with the tasks and goals of the therapy, and what determines the results of the effort, strategy, and trust they co-create. This roughly equates to accepting the ritual in psychotherapy, or what we previously learned was a necessary ingredient for the so-called placebo effect.
You can't drive an athlete. What happens is this, that if he chooses you and accepts you as a coach, you're only coaching with his consent. It is what he is prepared to consent to, and Seb's consent is total inside the areas for which I'm given charge. One of the powerful aids in training is the athlete must believe that what he is doing is good for him. And if you've got a pattern which you've achieved success on, you're very loath to change it. It's not just superstition, but it's a feeling. And this is the same with environment, same with everything else. Success tends to breed more.
At this point, it should be clear that the popularity of a therapy school is often a function of variables having nothing to do with the efficiency of its associated procedures. Among other things, it depends on the charisma, energy level, and longevity of the leader, the number of students trained and where they have been placed, and the spirit of the times. Indeed, it seems that psychotherapy traditions are also memes, competing for survival among patients in need. The political, economic, and academic incentives in psychotherapy have been caught up in a power game of who and what is right and wrong, rather than focusing on what may best benefit patients and providers, and how to translate research into clinical practice. Similar power games influence human society in more ways than we can afford. Perhaps our alliance concerning collective survival may confine our combative nature. Whether potentially facing hostile extraterrestrial life, seemingly surpassing our current laws of physics, terrors of nuclear war, or other factors threatening life on Earth. Interestingly, some therapists are better at creating placebos, and such effects seem pervasive across all social healing rituals. In one psychotherapy study, the top 10% of therapists performed 3 times better than the bottom 10%. As these differences cannot be accounted for by neither the method nor the patient characteristics. Recent psychotherapy research has focused on what characterizes clinical expertise. The essence extracted from expert therapists may be particularly potent for understanding how social healing happens. The list of such characteristics contain the capacity to be present enough to learn from each patient, entertain a broad repertoire of therapeutic strategies, embody interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence, as well as carefully challenge comfort zones. However, given the staggering standing of placebo effects in medicine, it seems that a crucial factor is also that expert therapists both master and believe in their own methods. In other words, they believe that the journey they are taking with a patient will lead to a place of increased clarity, trusting that the friction, struggle, and discomfort along the way are worth the effort. Otherwise, our experience has taught us that if we are not invested or lack faith in the process, then both the therapist and the patient often fall out of focus, lose their line of thought, or create foggy communication, as they are no longer attuned to the same channel of consciousness, but more to a parallel interpretation that may ground for confusion or so-called pretend mode. The therapeutic healing ritual needs to center on an acceptable healing narrative, combined with adequate trust in a socially sanctioned healer. Hence, even the Western practitioner needs to take her own medicine, trust the potion. Many researchers have questioned how it is possible that our society allows psychotherapists to perform without taking part in deliberate practice or being at the receiving end of psychotherapy. Deliberate practice consists of 3 components. 1. Performance of well-defined tasks at an appropriate level of difficulty. 2. Immediate and informative feedback. And 3. Opportunities for repetition and correction of performance errors.
Mordent, you have to bite into it. Al dente. That's very good. That's right. Very good. It must have a bite.
A novice musician would not take courses in music theory and then go directly to performing on stage. Yet, the predominant format of psychotherapy training requires the trainee to go directly from coursework to seeing real patients. While musicians typically know what to practice, psychotherapy research provides poor, often paradoxical, practical procedures for how to practice their profession. According to A.H. Almaz, the founder of the Diamond Approach, a contemporary spiritual school, you will need a strong capacity to digest reality, to stay present with others' turmoil or pain. Without such capacities, the healer will lose presence in presence, with the various emotions and projections in the therapy room, and consequently be less helpful or even become harmful. Hence, across ancient wisdom traditions, the teacher's capacity to digest experiences, for whatever inherent or acquired reason, allows alleviating another's agony. Some may be born with a core safety that provides them with such tolerance, while others obtain them by learning strategies and tools. Others, such as Marsha Linehan, the architect behind dialectic behavior therapy, have the ability to grow from their own life experiences or struggles with mental health and use that competence to recognize the same pain in others. She designed a treatment to suit other borderline patients the way she would have preferred to be treated.
So I had a technology of change, now I need a technology of acceptance.
This points us in a direction where our training programs for various practitioners within relational domains, be it leaders, therapists, child services, elderly care, or the educational system, would benefit deeply from doing some self-developmental work or form of psychotherapy before they attempt to provide a holding space for vulnerable people.
I've been transformed by the very therapy that I developed. What I found out when I went to the first Buddhist monastery was within days I knew that I had found exactly what my clients needed.
Not only would this reduce the risk of having more countertransference than necessary, but it would also develop one's capacity to explain what happens in the situations they are guaranteed to experience with their clients at some point. It would protect the receiver as well as the practitioner from being worn out by their profession. As we previously mentioned, psychotherapy has split into two camps: those who advocate administering specific potions according to a recipe, and those who champion common factors, such as emotional intelligence, interpersonal skills, and awareness of the alliance, to foster confidence in aspiring therapists. A marriage between these camps could nurture the ability to tailor the treatment to the patient and provide trust that a potion congruent with one's own culture and personal preferences is more important than the specific method itself, while at the same time trusting that mastering techniques is still of paramount importance. Although most methods, statistically speaking, seem equally efficient in producing clinical change, the nature of this development, or the lack thereof, differs widely. Research signals that the change narrative, the healing myth, influences how terminated patients understand themselves in retrospect, before, during, and after treatment. To the degree that they have changed, they ascribe it to the core narrative of the treatment, typically describing strategies for exploring their own minds in the terminology and language of the received treatment tradition, which becomes a part of their new narrative of themselves. This illuminates why evolution workers need to be clear channels and avoid contaminating children, patients, or clients with our own opinions. Most cultures claim that the ability to heal others is difficult to learn, and psychotherapy research indicates that simultaneously navigating one's own consciousness, the therapeutic relationship, and the patient state is a difficult art to master. To facilitate change, one needs to be able to disidentify from one's own emotions, such that one is able to use the relationship as a tool to systematically challenge maladaptive patterns. Without coloring the patient with his or her own interpretation of reality, the therapist's primary task is to gently provide new building blocks or strategies for how to process experiences. This evokes the allegory Dante conjured. Sunbeams are received in a realm of water, yet leave its core essence undisturbed. The revered Italian poet portrayed his ethereal voyage into paradise without disturbing its celestial quintessence. Extending this analogy, we observe that such luminaries of therapy radiate authenticity while concurrently channeling untainted cultural sagacity, the true healer. Such co-creation of social knowledge may be difficult to standardize and has largely been neglected in psychotherapy. In other traditions, such as Mahamudra meditation, the cultural transmission and incorporation of the presented tools are seen as more important than the relation to the present master. Practitioners in this ancient tradition typically evoke the lineage of deceased masters, the retinue, to facilitate the holding environment as well as transmit insights and conscious minding of others' minds, in order not to risk coloring other minds with their own biases. They base their interventions on knowledge confirmed through thousands of years. They typically teach by taking the approach of providing questions, pointing in a new direction of thought, and never providing answers as a constant truth. Many, if not most, healing myths have common denominators at their core, often denoted as perennial philosophies. Such cultural learning can take place at an explicit level, but seems especially powerful when the therapeutic relationship functions as a fountainhead of social learning, allowing for co-creation of tacit knowledge. This can be achieved by presenting metaphorical stories that the receiver may identify with, and sharing tried and true knowledge that can provide valuable building blocks for understanding. The teacher may embody relational aspects from the student's life, aiming to illuminate patterns through a playful manifestation, or they may illustrate a theme by relating it to someone else's experience, where the patient is invited in as an observer of a similar terrain, and therefore recognizing their own path as a parallel portrait. Such approaches may distance the subject from defensive limitations and allow them to witness their issue from an alternative perspective. This can detach us from our emotional identification, allowing for a clearer state of mind. By discovering insights rather than blindly adopting or doubting the therapist's personal interpretation of the situation, the patient takes ownership of their own healing process. Most traditions agree that insights inherited from active processing from within have a deeper impact and are the most valuable. Hence, A lesson we learn from perennial philosophy is that to facilitate change, it can be beneficial to create a channel for a larger culture, a specific method, or a map relevant to the presented problem. Peter Fonagy claims that social learning is what makes psychotherapy work, and is the way in which any effective treatment is embedded in metacognitive processes about the self, in relation to perceptual social reality. This is a change narrative congruent with wisdom traditions like Buddhism and Platonism, which after all believe that understanding brings about emotional release. Because society is humanity's primary selective environment, the ability to acquire social knowledge is the entrance to evolutionary change in all effective psychotherapy. Such a theory explains why one can be assigned a psychiatric diagnosis in one culture, while simultaneously being recognized as highly functioning in another. However, to open one's mind enough to create new neurological pathways, our channel of trust needs to be open and strong enough to integrate healthy influence from an outside source, while at the same time not so open that we risk maladaptive impact. This could be called the epistemic highway. Epistemic trust relates to how well individuals learn or fail to learn about themselves and the social world. Just as our culture can heal us, it can also make us sick. And our ability to learn from or contribute to our culture or meme pool may be handicapped or limited. Our current culture undermines epistemic trust, as our social environment has largely been digitized and largely deteriorated into an arena of deceptive forces on steroids. Epistemic freezing is considered an evolutionary protection from misinformation, whether the source of information is motivated by ignorance or the intention to deceive. It can also refer to a tendency to defend existing knowledge structures, even when they are incorrect or misleading. Stubborn and painful interactions may emerge from friction between conflicting interpretations of reality. Because of our different emotional and mental dialects, we often get lost in translation, defending our own viewpoints rather than trying to understand each other. The inner detective work of deciphering human intentions and mental states is typically denoted as mentalization. Mentalization has been proposed as a common factor among all effective psychotherapies. It prescribes a playful minding of minds and explores human intentions in an open manner, disentangling misconceptions of reality by evaporating emotional fog and therefore revealing mental clarity. As we learn from Socrates, guiding people to discover their own truths encourages epistemic trust. A transparent, non-judgmental holding environment holds the potential for such insights to occur. When the epistemic highway is opened, it facilitates mentalizing. But mentalization also cultivates a social recalibration of our minds. Providing easy answers, jumping to concrete conclusions, and performing mind reading typically do not foster sustainable growth. According to the theory of mentalization, the establishment of epistemic trust between the teacher and the learner is essential for communication to be accepted as meaningful and relevant. One may argue that psychotherapists can take their patients only as far as they themselves have come. However, to efficiently bypass such individual shortcomings, limitations of our own understanding and culture, the incorporation of perennial wisdom may foster epistemic trust and propose pathways for how we can recreate the collective wisdom of humanity at large. However, navigating the ever-increasing complexity of our culture and knowing that reality is largely an interpretation. Massive cultural confusion stems from applying scientific principles unsuited for approaching truth within that domain of knowledge. To simplify the complexity of human existence, the loneliness of our inner subjective universes makes us gather within cultural clusters or belief systems. We enroll ourselves in social groups where we identify with similar memes, philosophical thoughts, economic orientation, or religious guidelines that give many of us a sense of belonging by recognizing the same within as without. Different ways of organizing collective collaboration stem from different views on reality. Plato discusses 5 types of political regimes: aristocracy, democracy, oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny. Plato idealized meritocracy, in which leaders are selected by their wisdom. Like many contemporary critics, he deemed democracy an irresponsible form of government, soon to be followed by tyranny. The democratic process is slow and rule-based, and both tyranny and aristocracy will be able to move much quicker when facing major challenges, such as global warming or imperial colonialism. Indeed, life in Plato's ideal state resembles life under a totalitarian government. However, exchanging one tyrant's personal will with a wise leader channeling the collective wisdom or the democratic struggle necessary for a collective consensus to emerge may appear efficient. But it's really confusing me for we. When deciding whether invading a peaceful nation is acceptable, or whether old presidents could order young soldiers to offer their lives for such an endeavor, one's personal opinions appear to have little impact. Our culture even dictates the degree to which we would be allowed to express them or not. Hence, we recognize that the rules applied for finding truth when investigating the numbers of electrons in an atom are not the same as when we read Shakespeare's Hamlet or when a society agrees on its laws. In various misinterpretations of Thomas Kuhn, an American philosopher of science, science becomes merely one of numerous different readings of the text of the world, with no more actual authority than poetry, astrology, or palmistry. All are equally legitimate interpretations of the blooming, buzzing confusion of experience. On such a basis, a president could state something and claim that it is just as true as anything else, or simply deny reality and call it fake news. Rejecting such logic, the American philosopher Ken Wilber states that exterior surfaces can be seen by all, but interior depth must be interpreted. On face value, those who dance appear insane to those who cannot hear the music. If we try to apply the rules from one domain to another, for instance trying to have an objective view concerning literature, the only valid interpretation of Shakespeare's Hamlet would be to give a precise account of the number of protons or other physical attributes of the original manuscript. Correcting such category mistakes, Wilber has elaborated on the three validity claims by the German philosopher Jürgen Habermas and defined these four quadrants. The I domain involves thoughts, emotions, memories, states of mind, perceptions, and immediate sensations. An exemplification would be the collection of cases Freud used as an empirical backbone for his theory of dreams. The we domain embraces shared values, meanings, language, relationships, and cultural background. This domain explains the experience of being recognized by others within one's tribe, or those with the same worldview, or why international conflicts are so complex to solve. The it domain contains the material body, including brain, and anything one can see or touch or observe scientifically in time and space. Exemplifications from this domain include chemistry, biology, and physics. The its domain includes systems, networks, technology, government, and the natural environment. Blockchain technology and decentralized governance exemplify this domain. From such a standpoint, Buddhist meditation would be just as scientific as quantum mechanics, as long as they both postulate systematic principles that others could perform provided proper practice. Aristotle is assumed to have advanced logic, rules for thinking, to stop the sophists from stating that everything is true as long as it can be argued. However, logic also differs across cultures, and it has its limits. Aristotle's first rule says that A equals A, so water is water. A couple of millennia later, the German philosopher George Hegel argued that Aristotle's logical laws were too static, and said that water is not only water, but can also be gas and ice. Based on quantum theory, we assume that changes between such states can best be understood as quantum leaps. Ice becomes liquid at a specific temperature. Indian epistemology has a logical tetralemma, or 4 logical rules, and philosophers go into long discussions about aptavakya, which roughly translates to true knowledge from true source. On what grounds we should trust the testimony of the apta, and how far such trust should extend. building their foundation of knowledge on ancient wisdom, still constantly questioning it and trying to adapt it to the contemporary context. In the Western world, it appears that the political agenda or institutional governance is highly influenced by erratic behavior driven by the media, rather than keeping track of the most presidential issues, failing to focus on the larger picture, our natural environment and humanitarian welfare. The Nash equilibrium, popularized by the movie A Beautiful Mind, illustrates the delicate balance between individual actions and collective outcomes. It shows that individuals may act in their own self-interest, while these actions can lead to a stable state in which unilateral actions based on greed do not yield additional benefits. However, this equilibrium does not guarantee the optimal outcome for society at large. By embracing the principles of Nash equilibrium, we recognize the folly of prioritizing individual greed over collective well-being. In the prose of Dostoevsky, the world says, "You have needs. Satisfy them. You have as much right as the rich and the mighty. Don't hesitate to satisfy your needs. Indeed, expand your needs and demand more." This is the worldly doctrine of today, and they believe that this is freedom. The result for the rich is isolation and suicide. For the poor, envy and murder. This pattern of thinking has crossed great portions of humanity into a sidetrack of egocentric greed and the misuse of power. Detaching from the rest of us, their compassion or capacity for the empathic listening necessary for constructive change becomes derailed. Dostoevsky persists. A man who lies to himself and believes his own lies becomes unable to recognize truth either in himself or in anyone else, and he ends up losing respect for himself and for others. When he has no respect for anyone, he can no longer love, and to divert himself, having no love in him, he yields to his impulses, indulges in the lowest forms of pleasure, and behaves in the end like an animal. And it all comes from lying. Lying to others and to yourself. Examples like the prisoner's dilemma demonstrate that cooperation and resource sharing lead to better outcomes for the whole. Humanity's history is rife with the dangers of unchecked self-interest, which breeds conflict and inequality. Yet, by choosing cooperation, we unlock a path to mutual prosperity. Together, we can build a world where harmony and balance reign, transcending the zero-sum mindset. Let us heed the call to embrace cooperation, ensuring a brighter future for generations to come. Unfortunately, as demonstrated by the line experiment by Ash, the surrounding material that stimulates our minds is also what influences our estimation of the truth. If the media's presentation of reality mainly focuses on tragedy, trauma, and everything that is wrong about our world, the devastation of our being becomes overwhelming. This attention bait fosters our collective narrative about the world's condition. From Langer's counterclockwise experiment, we have learned how deep and fast our inner perception of our circumstances makes a huge difference in both our physical and emotional well-being. This explains why those of us who are searching for the deeper truth fall victim to a form of apathy, depression, or self-centeredness, because the matrix seems more pervasive than we would perhaps prefer.
In the Matrix movies, artificial intelligence, AI, is a powerful and intelligent force that has taken over the world and is using humans as a source of energy. The map has swallowed the terrain, as in Simulacra and Simulation by Jean Baudrillard. Logically speaking, this seems possible. Alan Turing is celebrated as one of the pioneers of modern computing. His work implies that AI can perform any computation that can be logically defined. However, despite such endless possibilities, the living nature of consciousness can probably never be replaced by AI. The first argument suggesting this can be stolen from Kurt Friedrich Gödel, an impactful mathematician, and implies that there will always be some things that any AI system could neither prove nor disprove. This underscores the existence of truths that lie beyond provable domains in axiomatic systems, and that consciousness cannot be reduced to computations. The second argument stems from Chris Langton, a computer scientist known for his work on artificial life. His work implies that AI systems do not possess consciousness or self-awareness. In his book Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel laureate in economics, describes two different systems of thought that we use to make judgments and decisions. Humans excel in System 1 thinking, which is fast, automatic, and intuitive, and responsible for perception, attention, language, and memory. It is often described as the gut reaction or automatic pilot. System 2 is slower, more deliberate, more logical, and more effortful, and it is responsible for tasks such as problem solving, decision making, and planning. It is slower because it requires more mental effort and concentration, and it is more likely to be accurate and reliable, because it is based on careful analysis and reasoning. However, it is also more prone to mental fatigue and can be overwhelmed by complex or demanding tasks. While the human mind is typically limited to remember around 7 items at the same time and unable to process information in parallel, AI has an almost endless capacity for such System 2 thinking. Humans are better at understanding and recognizing complex patterns, even if they don't fully understand the rules that create them. AI systems have difficulties understanding complex patterns, even when they are given rules and examples. By combining the strengths of both humans and AI, we can achieve better outcomes and solve complex problems more efficiently, such as in medical diagnostics. In the future, merging the intuitive pattern recognition and creativity of human systems with the speed, accuracy, and capacity of AI systems may be a key step in our evolution.
One of the most successful theories categorized within the it quadrant is quantum theory, which describes the real world with a precision equivalent to measuring the distance from Los Angeles to New York, to the thickness of a human hair. However, despite the spectacular success of this theory, logical rules are limited in their ability to predict reality. In order to illustrate this paradoxical nature of our logical foundation, let us contemplate the following question. Are there programs, regardless of their complexity or scale, whose outcomes neither humans nor computers can predict before they are actually run? Turing, who posed the same question, showed that the answer is indeed yes. Given a program with, let us say, only 3 naive rules, would we be able to predict what happens without simply running the program? Surprisingly, the answer is no, contrary to what most of us would probably expect. This was proven by Gödel, Turing, and Langton to be impossible, even with AI or quantum computers and no time limit. Invented by Chris Langton in 1986. Langton's Ant is a 2-dimensional universal Turing machine with a simple set of rules but complex emergent behavior. The Ant starts out on a grid containing black and white cells and then follows the following set of rules. 1. If the Ant is on a black square, it turns right 90 degrees and moves forward 1 unit. 2. If the Ant is on a white square, it turns left 90 degrees and moves forward 1 unit. 3. When the Ant leaves a square, it inverts the color. When the program is run, it first creates very simple patterns, which are often symmetric. Then disorder arises, and a large, irregular pattern of black and white squares appears. After around 10,000 steps, order suddenly emerges, and the Ant starts building a recurrent highway pattern of 104 steps that repeats indefinitely. In fact, Gödel's so-called incompleteness theorem states that there will always be an infinite number of untrue mathematical statements that can be proven, and vice versa. Wittgenstein stated at the opening of his first lecture on the foundation of mathematics at Cambridge in 1939. When we learn spelling, we learn the spelling of the word spelling, but we do not call that spelling of the second order. There seems to be no second-order logic, no way to inspect axioms and foretell what happens when the system manifests. Roger Penrose, the 2020 Nobel laureate in physics, says that when we convince ourselves of the validity of Gödel's theorem, we not only see it, but by so doing, we reveal the very non-algorithmic nature of the seeing process itself. Consequently, the idea that the human mind operates via algorithms, as a computer does, in a wholly machine-like, rule-driven manner, would mean that we could never perceive the truth of this theorem, because it is not derived algorithmically, which the proof proves. Evidently, Even the measurements of protons imply interpretation, according to present physics. Indeed, it seems that interpretation is not something added on to the cosmos as an afterthought. It is the very opening of the interiors themselves. And since the depth of the cosmos goes all the way down, then, as Heidegger famously put it, interpretation goes all the way down. Or, as the English author and philosopher Alan Watts eloquently put it, the knower is never an object of its own knowledge, because fire does not burn fire. In other words, human consciousness contains several layers of awareness and facets of intelligence that hold different perspectives of truth at the same time. And to make it even more confusing, they often contradict each other. We can even fool ourselves to get lost in distractions that shade our judgment of the circumstances, or influence the choices that dictate the destiny of our lives. In line with such an epistemological framework, the theory of mentalization states that mental content is hidden for ourselves and others and promotes an open-ended inquiry into our quest to better understand social reality. Although some rare masters may be able to develop in solitude, most human beings need cultural contact, mirroring, or reassurance, be it in a form of parents, coaches, therapists, deceased composers, philosophers, or authors. According to Fonagy, mentalization is facilitated by the quality of the attachment relationship. Hence, the ability to reflect on one's own mind and other minds will not develop unless one is minded by another mind. The recent focus on epistemic trust within psychotherapy stems from the observation that, contrary to common consensus and research on social animals, suggesting that secure attachment is at the core of normal development. Some children do fine without such empathic support, as long as they have one significant person manifesting a source of true social knowledge or wisdom. This wisdom comes from our depth, with the intention of doing good and becoming the best version of ourselves. We cannot only be that significant other that makes a huge difference for someone else, but from the wisdom of our consciousness, we can participate in the movement of awareness that can spread just as fast as those destructive forces that try to fill our minds with fear, hopelessness, or anger. The evolution of the species, generally considered to be caused by the natural selection of random mutations in our genome, has a difficult time explaining the missing links in the process of change in our biological development. The theory of punctuated equilibrium suggests that evolutionary change often occurs in rapid bursts, interspersed with long periods of stasis, rather than through constant gradual mutation. Interestingly, Ichotsu and other perennial teachers argue that the same phenomenon exists in terms of evolution through memes. the collective creation of cultures. To consider this, one does not need to embrace the theory of the British biologist Rupert Sheldrake to recognize the phenomenon behind his so-called morphic fields. Newton and Leibniz both envisioned calculus at the same time, while Einstein and Poincaré concurrently contemplated relativity. Such simultaneous surfacing of similar technologies or ideas hints at a shared underlying morphic field. Similarly, in cultural evolution, we witness patterns akin to biological processes, where shifts in spiritual, athletic, mental, and relational development occur in leaps and bounds, often spurred by significant catalysts. Could cultural evolution mirror genetic evolution in terms of seemingly making quantum leaps, suddenly including and transcending the previous state? Interestingly, archaeologists find no gradual evolution towards the Cheops pyramid. In fact, it seems that the first construct was a close copy of the Platonic idea of the pyramid itself, while later replicas gradually deteriorated over time, and the lost ones are significantly less impressive. Within Chinese culture, historians report the sudden appearance of a broad understanding of medicine under the Yellow Emperor, as well as the Chinese classics, with a similar gradual decline, despite meticulous efforts to memorize them. Some would also argue that Bach was a clear channel for God's music, while later composers opened such a channel only temporarily. According to Sir Andras Schiff, Bach became a professor figure for Mozart when the latter discovered the manuscripts of his predecessor at the age of 25. A mastery he was never able to replicate. The British mathematician and philosopher Alfred Whitehead stated, "The safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. Hence, from such anecdotal evidence or various degrees of pseudoscience, one may at least suspect that many cultures appear to have moved in quantum leaps, often as a phoenix resurrecting from the ashes of the preceding paradigm. If so, one can join John Lennon and other visionaries in imagining what earthly paradise we can create, when the current friction between different cultures increases the temperature to some unknown point. When ice turns to water, conflict and climate crisis could convert to global awareness. It seems that Ken Wilber's statement that exterior surfaces can be seen by all is a relative truth.
The double-slit experiment from quantum mechanics reveals that particles like electrons and photons display both wave-like and particle-like properties.
And that our culture is embedded in our very perception of reality.
When only one slit is open, particles act as expected for particles, forming a single pattern consistent with their nature. With both slits open, particles create an interference pattern on a screen, which is characteristic of waves, not particles.
But what happens with the foundation upon which we base our reality?
Introducing detectors to see through which slit a particle passes changes the outcome. The interference pattern vanishes, and particles act like particles, not waves.
If we decide to disidentify with the normative narrative we are presented with, from our parents, media, or governments,
the double-slit experiment suggests that the observer plays a key role in determining the behavior of particles at the quantum level, leading to philosophical debates about the nature of reality.
What is left to construct our own interpretations of reality? Phasing phenomena typically considered outside normal culture may cause confusion and psychological distress in lack of guidance on how to interpret such experiences. According to Stanislav Grof, a Czech-born psychiatrist and researcher, much psychological distress is caused by having experiences that deviate from normal perception, that are too profound to resonate with one's current worldview. Such spontaneous, mystical encounters, unaccounted for or dismissed as deviant by conventional culture, may result in what he named spiritual emergencies. They could stem from experiencing various parapsychological phenomena, or discover a truth that contradicts all one has ever believed in. Being a mother who suddenly lifts up a car to save her screaming child pinned underneath may serve as an example of so-called hysterical strength, despite such experiences being reported in the media. They may still cause inner chaos for the mother, who may start doubting her own reality or perception of it. There are related reasons why many spiritual practices are kept secret, and why most cultures prescribe only mind-altering substances in the presence of a qualified facilitator. Being declared dead and then later waking up. Taking substantial doses of psychedelics without proper guidance. Waking up inside a dream where you observe yourself from a viewpoint outside your own body. Feeling united with Earth, God, or your lover. Or simply the experience of becoming a parent are other exemplifications of altered consciousness that may make you question your assumptions. Similarly, strong encounters with art, such as music heard so deeply that it is not heard at all, but you are the music, while the music lasts. To quote the American poet T.S. Eliot, may also cause psychological growing pains. In 1985, Grof wrote, "There exists increasing evidence that many individuals experiencing episodes of non-ordinary states of consciousness, accompanied by various emotional, perceptual, and psychosomatic manifestations, are undergoing an evolutionary crisis rather than suffering from a mental disease. Could it be that a flatland version of reality, haunting us through media streams and social constructs, feels too tight, and that the world that has been pulled over our eyes to blind us from the truth is now pressuring our consciousness to push back on those boundaries and look beyond our current understanding of normal awareness. Even though technology advances, our institutional governing lags behind, and we are again witnessing riots and political protests erupting. Our human rights are not slowly advancing, but regressing, making us question whether the people and minds behind these decisions are allegedly working on behalf of our best interests. At the other end of the spectrum, some with distress and many with excitement, are anticipating mind-blowing developments that will be as world-shattering as what the internet was for our grandparents. It is obvious that our current consumer mentality is not sustainable. Thankfully, our technological development reluctantly turns toward environmental responsibility. Still, we believe that change depends on new ways of thinking, being, and relating. Perhaps a change of fundamental values.
At first, the square has no idea of what's happening. He's terribly confused. This is utterly outside his experience. But after a while, he comes to realize that he is seeing inside closed rooms in Flatland. He is looking inside his fellow flat creatures. He is seeing Flatland from a perspective no one has ever seen it before to his knowledge. Getting into another dimension provides as an incidental benefit a kind of X-ray vision.
The privilege of having the world of information in our pocket can be seen as freedom. At the same time, constant availability with the ability to respond immediately has pushed the efficiency of our work capacity beyond our physical limits. Many of us, including our children, are even dependent on antidepressants or anxiety medicines to keep up with the race we have made up, complying with the illusion of what makes us successful. The Buddhist teacher, the Dalai Lama, says, "The planet does not need more successful people. The planet desperately needs more peacemakers, healers, restorers, storytellers, and lovers of all kinds." The quality of our attachments has largely been reduced to digital relationships, or a concentration span that is struggling to stay present with our loved ones without constantly checking our phones. Perhaps we are now mature enough to accelerate our inner journey of development and allow our personal and scientific curiosity to discover our own consciousness as far as we have already plotted out the outer universe. The mere awareness that many traditions and advanced practitioners of various spiritual systems have already mapped out much of our psychological and spiritual structures and created a language for this expertise may help individuals in transition to digest and integrate their new experiences in a functional consciousness. This highlights that change can occur not only through attention, alliance, and attachment, but also when the evolution worker succeeds in being a channel for cultural transmission. The mysterious pull of that inner flame searching for a deeper truth grows stronger when resonating with another flame. with a consciousness that keeps guiding us towards our best version of ourselves by finding pieces of our puzzle in books, movies, meditation, relationships, or at the bottom of experienced pain. Still, what typically counts for the most valuable knowledge, so-called implicit or tacit knowledge, cannot simply be transmitted, but must usually be recreated within a real relationship. People know more than they can say. That is, they are guided by knowledge that they do not know they have, or that they find difficult to articulate. Hence, the transmission of knowledge means that the overarching strategy should fall under the receiver's level of insight or knowledge. This is probably the most established pedagogical principle. According to Aristotle, all teaching is from things previously known. However, what is grasped by episteme is what is demonstrated. And since there must be first principles of demonstration, there is no episteme of the principles of knowledge. That is to say, the principles of demonstration cannot be demonstrated. Hence, opening the channel for epistemic trust, or fostering the miracle of understanding, is a sophisticated art. Wittgenstein summarized this well. To convince someone of the truth, it is not enough to state it, but rather one must find a path from error to truth. If you can do that, says the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, if you can accurately find the place where the other person is and begin there, then you can perhaps have the good fortune of leading him to the place where you are.
I have a son who's 4, and he had this bad habit of writing on the walls with crayons. And one evening I walked into his room and he's going at it, just writing and drawing and so on, and I said, hey. Are you stupid? Don't you ever do that again. And guess what happened? He did it again. Nobody likes to be threatened. Nobody likes to be intimidated. His pride would not allow it. He did it again just to spite me. A week later, I walked into his room and again, he's going at it. And this time, he was even looking at me just. I came down and said, sweetie, come here. Don't do that. You're a big boy now. And he never did it again. Because his pride wants him to be the big boy.
Robert Keegan, Harvard professor of psychology, has successfully shown that the mind, like the body, continues to develop after adolescence. He states that the process of development is an effort to resolve the tension between the desire to be immersed in one's surroundings and an equally powerful desire to be a separate individual. At some point in life, many people discover that their own moral compass seems more aligned with truth than with collective consensus, while at the same time being powerless alone. Such painful experiences are the driving force behind the human developmental process. Gradually realizing and potentially unplugging from the matrix. The process of growth involves an evolution of meaning that is marked by continual shifts from periods of stability to periods of instability, leading to the ongoing reconstruction of the relationship between persons and their environments. Each succeeding order consists of cognitive, interpersonal, and interpersonal components. Keegan viewed the human developmental process in 5 levels of consciousness, moving from being dictated by external social rules to becoming free to create one's own rules. Level 4 is called the self-authoring mind. At this stage, which is the most realistic level most people can expect to attain during their lives, one has the capacity to take responsibility for and ownership of their internal authority, and freely author their own set of values and ideologies. At this level of human development, relationships become a part of one's world, rather than the reason for one's existence. And one regains the power of adjusting illusions caused by cultural contaminations of our minds, such as replacing the wrong line with the right one. The 5th developmental stage is called the self-transforming mind. At this level of consciousness, which is infrequently reached and almost never reached before the age of 40, individuals see beyond themselves, others, and systems of which they are a part, to form an understanding of how all people and systems interconnect. Keegan was clear that the process of evolving through these levels of consciousness can be painful, since it involves changing one's way of relating and functioning in the world. Borrowing from psychologist Donald Winnicott, he introduced the idea of the holding environment to assist individuals with these changes. The holding environment has 2 functions: supporting individuals in their current stage of development and encouraging movement to the next evolutionary stage. He equated a holding environment to an evolutionary bridge, a context for crossing over from one order of consciousness to the next, a more developed order. As our work lives are often a significant part of our lived lives, this is an important arena for personal development. As the international management thinker and corporate philosopher Debashis Chatterjee wrote in 1998, leadership is neither a science nor an art. It is a state of consciousness. And we can now begin to grasp the phenomenon of leadership as the field of awareness, rather than a personality trait or mental attribute. Otto Scharmer is an author and senior lecturer at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Together with his colleagues at MIT, he proposes that attention combined with intention is the real superpower of our age. Theory U, his core contribution concerning the field of learning and management, proposes that the quality of the results that we create in any kind of social system is a function of the quality of consciousness, awareness, or attention that the participants in the system operate from. For Scharmer, Every individual in an organization is a leader, and the web of social interactions is the social field in which productive results can grow. Chalmers' theory both quotes and aligns with Albert Einstein's supposed statement, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." Theory U identifies 7 essential leadership capacities, of which creating a sufficient holding space is the first. This dimension of leadership means listening to oneself and to others, and making sure that there is space where people can talk. To change the quality of consciousness in the relations in an organization, he brings 4 ways of listening to our awareness. At level 1, downloading. We typically think about our own answer or other things while the other speaks. At level 2, factual listening. We are focused on learning the facts we do not already know. However, we are separating these facts from the human being we're having the conversation with, and we are not paying attention to their feelings or emotions, or the nuances of the conversation. At level 3, empathic listening. We listen to the content while also connecting with the speaker on a more emotional level. We can put ourselves in their shoes and start to see things from their perspectives. We can also align to their perspectives while maintaining the ability to provide friendly, constructive challenges. At level 4, generative listening. The listener moves beyond connecting with the speaker to connect with the core ideas of the conversation and their potential futures. We are also fully focused on helping to bring the best possible future into being, and our ego and any other barriers are dropped. At this level, it is possible to generate new ideas and find the energy and enthusiasm to manifest them. These insights are finally incorporated into business and educational institutions, gradually also impacting mainstream society and increasing the practical application of our cultural heritage. Embodying the principle, "Be the change you want to see in the world," requires a high degree of consciousness, perhaps a self-authoring mind. We know that the ability to mentalize typically collapses when constantly doubting oneself or reality, and in the face of fear or strong negative emotions. Hence, the tendency to blame others for the current state of affairs, instead of making adaptive changes, seems normal and difficult to amend. From the Sufi tradition, we learn that the Black Latifa can manifest as doubt in the head center, causing the feeling of hatred to castrate our trust and steadfastness. To bring humanity across the evolutionary bridge between self-centered fear and greed into a culture fostering adaptive change. Applying the entire toolkit of our collective understanding of what fosters change is required. Dostoevsky observed, "Suffering and pain are always obligatory for people of broad intellect and a deep heart. Truly great people, I think, must feel great sadness for the world. Our culture can make us sick. One of our diseases on earth is judging those who appear different than us. Brighter generations are more inclusive and try to dispel the shadows of racism, sexism, ageism, and alike by enlightening us with acceptance and unconditional love. However, we should not confuse fairness with blindness. Otherwise, we may fulfill the prophecy that tolerance will reach such a level that intelligent people will be forbidden to think, so as not to offend fools. We must dare to face the pain in this world, to do something about it. Treating symptoms will not be a solution. We need to find the root of our problems for us to solve them. Instead of being in denial, we must take responsibility for the wounds that we have caused, for them to heal, both as individuals and as a group. Otherwise, they will keep aching somewhere under the surface until they rise again. If a person or those we have branded minorities say that you have hurt them, or that the majority has neglected their rights, it is not your place to say we have not. Instead, we should ask in what way, and what can I do to make it right? This entails being more precise than simply orbiting a trendy opinion. By recognizing our shared inner flame, we might find the courage to confront our shared demons, not by judging them in others, but by searching for honest answers about why we reject different aspects of ourselves in others. In 1977, Wilfred Bion, a brilliant British psychoanalyst, simply wrote, "I think it is better to know the truth about oneself and the universe in which I exist. But I do not wish to imply that it is nicer or pleasanter." As we have seen, all healing rituals depend on a culturally accepted healing myth. Healing is expected as long as this myth is culturally accepted by the patient. Such myths, regardless of their factual accuracy, also play a crucial role in the collective fabric. For example, during the Black Death in Europe, the prevailing religious and superstitious explanations for the plague significantly influenced societal responses, even though they lacked scientific accuracy. Public penance and the persecution of scapegoats thought to be responsible for the disease, such as cats, witches, or Jews, reflected the collective need for explanation or comprehension and control in the face of the unknown. Historians debate whether such myths, which led to the murder of many innocent cats, inadvertently increased the number of rats transmitting the plague. The process of challenging outdated beliefs can be likened to scientific revolutions, as described by the influential philosopher Thomas Kuhn, in the structure of scientific revolutions. Just as the shift from a geocentric to a heliocentric model of the solar system was a painful yet necessary transition, societies too undergo paradigm shifts. For example, the Enlightenment period marked a significant shift from a religious to a more reason-based understanding of the world, radically altering societal and political landscapes. Hence, we could well apply the concept of the placebo effect in societal dynamics, a psychological phenomenon where belief in the system or authority can lead to real outcomes, underscoring its significance in societal and cultural evolution. When trust in experts and institutions is at an all-time low, it translates to low epistemic trust and a weak alliance in therapeutic terms. Consequently, placebo is lost. The idea that belief in a system or authority can lead to tangible outcomes is pivotal. This is not only true in medical contexts, but also in economic and political scenarios. For instance, public confidence in economic policies can significantly influence economic outcomes, regardless of the intrinsic merits of the policies themselves. When the American Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, tries to manipulate inflation, it acknowledges that the psychological expectation is as important as the actual rate. Seen from such a lens, we can recognize that the placebo effect, the magical glue in our society, including trust in experts, systems, institutions, and relationships, is as relevant for how societies and cultures evolve as for the individual seeking to heal. Currently, our culture, likened to a patient, is in a phase where outdated illusions are being scrutinized. Younger generations are challenged to confront outdated paradigms, employing our collective magnifying glass of truth. This transformative process can be painful, akin to purgatorial flames. Yet it is essential for the primary succession of societies and the rejuvenation of our collective mission. This aligns with the Strauss-Howe generational theory, a framework that describes recurring generational cycles in American and Western history. Developed by William Strauss and Neil Howe, this theory suggests that historical events are linked to recurring generational personas, with each generation unleashing a new era or turning every 20th to 25th year. These turnings are part of a larger cycle known as a cyclium, spanning over 80 to 100 years. This generational theory outlines 4 turnings. The first turning, an era of growth and unity, arises from the ashes of the previous paradigm, exemplified by the social structures sculpted after the Second World War. The Second Turning, a period of spiritual upheaval, challenges established norms and values and aligns with the cultural and political upheaval of the 1960s, marked by the civil rights movement, anti-Vietnam War protests, and the feminist movement. The Third Turning is marked by individualism and the fragmentation of social structures. Generation X was a product of times when societal structures became more decentralized and fragmented, and the focus shifted from collective action to individual autonomy, and skepticism towards grand narratives or institutions. The Fourth Turning, which we currently navigate, is a phase of significant societal transformation, which could be illustrated by the complex reactions to climate change. This crisis has galvanized a new generation into action, demanding transformative changes in how societies interact with the environment. While the current era of skepticism towards experts and institutions can be seen as a societal illness, when the placebo effect of institutional trust is lost, society's ability to cohere and respond effectively to challenges is diminished. This is evident in contemporary political polarization and the spread of misinformation. This situation requires a form of social healing, where new, more robust forms of trust and cooperation are developed. From our research at the Quality Lab of Psychotherapy in Oslo, we have found that the best therapists avoid providing easy answers, speak the language of the patient, challenge adequately, and do not let their own emotions prevent or stop them from staying focused on the goals and tasks of the therapy. They believe in their own method, and if one way is blocked, they find another route according to their overall understanding of the patient, presented problem, relation, and situation. We also know that the best therapists are those who are genuine and learn something from the interactions themselves. The lessons from working with organizations seem similar. To instigate change, we need to avoid providing quick fixes, tolerate the pain of growth without jumping to conclusions, not lose track of the overall goal, and view the intervention as an experiment. Our ability to interpret human intentions and actions is like a muscle, and it needs practice, regardless of whether it is named mentalization, social cognition, metacognitive abilities, enlightened intuition, or emotional intelligence. We all start by becoming more honest with ourselves, exercising our capacity to look within, reflecting upon our own patterns, mistakes, and weaknesses, and making amends with ourselves. This will eventually allow for a more compassionate presence with ourselves and others. By becoming aware of patterns that trigger defenses from our upbringing, previous traumas, or idealist truths, we will boost our psychological immune system. When we allow the emotional storm to pause without being identified with it. This will improve our tolerance, creating a holding environment not only for ourselves, but also for others. Human beings differ not only in personality, culture, or knowledge, but they are also at different evolutionary stages. And unless we follow some ancient guidance from Plato or modern theories from the likes of Robert Kegan, such change may be severely dysfunctional. Plato's ideal is a state where the wise rules. From such a view, it is time for true leaders to step up. Anders Eriksson, a leading expert on expertise, warns that the journey to truly superior performance is neither for the faint of heart nor for the impatient. The development of genuine expertise also requires struggle, sacrifice, and honest, often painful self-assessment. There are no shortcuts. It will take at least a decade to achieve expertise, and one will need to invest that time wisely by engaging in deliberate practice that focuses on tasks beyond one's current level of competence and comfort. One will need a well-informed coach, not only to guide them through deliberate practice, but also to help them learn how to coach themselves. Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater, has developed a sophisticated system for supporting radical transparency in organizations.
I wanted to make an idea meritocracy. In other words, not an autocracy in which I would lead and others would follow, and not a democracy in which everybody's points of view were equally valued, but I wanted to have an idea meritocracy in which the best ideas would win out. And in order to do that, I realized that we would need radical truthfulness and radical transparency. What I mean by radical truthfulness and radical transparency is people needed to say what they really believed and to see everything. I mean, we literally tape almost all conversations and let everybody see everything, because if we didn't do that, we couldn't really have an idea meritocracy. In order to have an idea meritocracy, we have to let people speak and say what they want. Just to give you an example, this is an email from Jim Haskell, who somebody who works for me, and this was available to everybody in the company. Ray, you deserve a D- for your performance today in the meeting. You did not prepare it all well because there is no way you could have been that disorganized. Isn't that great? That's great. It's great because, first of all, I needed feedback like that. I need feedback like that. And it's great because if I don't let Jim and people like Jim to express their points of view, our relationship wouldn't be the same. And if I didn't make that public for everybody to see, we wouldn't have an idea meritocracy.
Dalio states that radical transparency and truth do not suit everyone, but those who work at Bridgewater typically express appreciation for having a workplace that also promotes personal growth. Becoming aware of own strengths and weaknesses is one concrete example, as is continually being challenged out of one's own comfort zone by questioning one's own habitual belief systems. According to Kegan, having a workplace at levels 4 or 5 is exceptional. Our culture no longer provides secure solutions to anything, and finding truth seems more challenging than ever. When we lose ethical guidelines and guidance from authorities, the individual must avoid apathy and create purpose and value according to own preferences. Dostoevsky also wrote, "The mystery of human existence lies not in just staying alive, but in finding something to live for." By integrating the toolkit outlined in this movie, we may become more aware of what colors our perception of reality. The first step is becoming aware of this knowledge. The second step is recognizing it in one's own mind, and then cleaning out clutter that was placed there from other sources that may or may not resonate with our truth. Importantly, by challenging both our own and others' comfort zones, and not necessarily agreeing with a common consensus, we discover what we know in our hearts is right for us. To develop our reflective capacity, we also need to be compassionate with ourselves. Rather than criticizing not being an ideal version of ourselves, we should employ the wisdom of expert therapists and meet the pattern or issue with a non-judging curiosity. This will help us see how our minds are influenced and what impacts our judgment. This adventure of self-discovery may give us something to live for and likely inspire change in others. Regarding our collective consciousness, true growth is waking up to the reality that nobody will save this planet for us. In a 2015 commencement speech, climate activist and author Naomi Klein said that the idea that we can save the world through personal actions is objectively nuts. Such statements seem perplexed by the paradox that the sole individual is insufficient to address the crisis, while individual action is at the same time a crucial element in the climate justice equation. Such logic stalemates action, dismissing the importance of individual responsibility on the one hand, and also presenting an incomplete strategy for political change on the other. Hence, a personal action versus a political action binary is careless, and we must foster both collective and individual action simultaneously. Despite the vulnerability we have for being distracted by others' opinions, well-organized groups make better decisions than individuals, the wisdom of crowds. However, to make groups wise, we need to encourage dissent and create a culture that views errors as experiments to learn from, rather than punish or avenge. Social safety is at the core of such work, but without becoming too cozy, avoidant, or otherwise distracted from the pain that change naturally entails. Our culture can heal us or make us sick. We can evolve or we can eradicate our species. It all depends on our ability to awaken from our state of inertia idealism, self-indulgence, intellectualization, and inhumanity. Importantly, we need not drown in our despair of our collective challenge being too overwhelming for any individual to act. If we trust that the global crisis holds the promise of a potential psychological and collective cultural awakening, we can follow the advice from Otto Scharmer and trust that the best version of our future selves will evolve us, allowing each individual cell to awaken and heal the overall organism. Langton Sant instills hope that by becoming the best version of ourselves, order may suddenly erupt from chaos, and that no matter how confusing the world may appear, we cannot predict the future. Personal action and collective political action are self-reinforcing, and the solution to our cultural and climate crisis is neither on the individual nor the political level, but both. Groups, such as teams in the workplace, musicians in an orchestra, and clients gathered together to seek therapeutic gains, are the primary vehicles for humans to achieve a variety of social and instrumental goals. But what is that one factor, that one critical ingredient that will transform an ordinary everyday group into one that yields significant and long-lasting outcomes for its members? Cohesion. A shared commitment to the group and its overall goals. Or, in other words, a collective alliance. As failing to secure our species' survival is an experiment we cannot afford to learn from. There is reason to hope that the common threat of extinction may unite us. To keep a steadfast direction, we must not only be more honest with our inner compass of truth, but we also need to restore trust in experts for cultural evolution to manifest itself. Rather than being distracted by finding out why something works, let us invest in what actually works, and how such trust may invoke individuals' cohesion to our collective mission to evolve the constructive humanity needed for an inhabitable future. And if you don't recognize people as being smarter than an amoeba, then trust in Dictio Stellium, Disco Diem, or Dicti among friends. This amoeba demonstrates how the collective can outperform the individual. As long as food is plentiful, they exist as individuals, practically speaking, as single-cell organisms without any sensory capacities. However, when the going gets tough, as many as 100,000 combine in a cluster, becoming capable of sensing, moving, and reproducing, despite their individual limitations. Such emergent phenomena, where the collective achieves new capabilities, be it in magnetism when all atoms align with the same spin. The cooperative quantum state causing superfluidity. Or consciousness emerging as a result of a sufficiently complex neural network. Signal that our collective biology may possess surprising survival abilities.